Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, there's one person, just one person, who is responsible for the widespread death and devastation inside Ukraine right now, and that is Vladimir Putin. He has attacked and invaded a sovereign nation without justification. Putin's nostalgia for the old Soviet Union is despicable, and his imperialist ambitions to expand his authoritarian grasp are in direct violation of international law, humanitarian principles, and the very stability of the post-World War II peace that has endured in much of the world for decades. Putin is a tyrant and a murderer. His decision to put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert in response to entirely reasonable criticism from NATO, Germany, and the threat of financial sanctions is unconscionable. It's a move that harkens all the way back to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. A leader of a superpower has unilaterally brought civilization closer to nuclear annihilation. This is indefensible, and the whole world knows it. The people of Russia know it. That's why thousands of them are protesting Putin's war all over their country. Putin's government has arrested more than 6,000 peaceful demonstrators so far. Putin's nuclear threats will put the rest of the developed world on high alert in response. This means we've rapidly landed in a place where the risk of all-out nuclear war is significantly higher. There's no reason for this. We are in this situation because of the actions of one very evil man. All of that said, it's important to call out the bad foreign policy moves on the part of the United States that unfortunately helped get us here. And even though no one did this but Putin, the U.S.'s failed approach to Russia for the last 30 years, a bipartisan approach that includes mistakes by Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, deserves criticism as well. Let's start with the Clinton administration. In the 1990s, as my Reason magazine colleague Eric Bain pointed out, Clinton was the first U.S. president in decades to inherit a world that did not include the Soviet Union. Clinton could have completely revamped NATO, now that its purpose, defending member nations against the expansion of the Soviet Union, was no longer applicable. Instead, Clinton, with the Republican Party's support, oversaw an expansion of NATO. Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Poland all joined. Years later, Putin would cite this enlargement of NATO as one of the West's broken promises that justified his Ukraine policy. Again, Putin is dead wrong. Nothing justifies his Ukraine policy. But the purpose of NATO was defensive, to protect the world from Russian aggression. If NATO policy is antagonizing Russia and being used as a pretext for invasion, clearly isn't serving that goal. Now, with the Clinton administration's backing, NATO also intervened in Yugoslavia in 1999 to ensure the breakup of the country in an independent Kosovo. That military action never had the backing of the United Nations. It was a violation of international law, just like Putin's attack on the Ukraine. George Bush's foreign policy has not held up well due to the U.S.'s horrendous misadventures in the Middle East, but Bush blundered in Europe as well. At a 2008 NATO summit, one attended by Putin, Bush staunchly supported the eventual admittance of the Ukraine to NATO over the objections of France and the UK and Germany. The Obama administration, of course, inflamed tensions with Russia when the U.S. took sides in the 2014 Ukrainian revolution, and then came Donald Trump. Democrats and their allies in the mainstream media have ceaselessly accused Trump of being a Russian stooge, even a pro-Putin plant installed by Russia as president of the United States due to a subtle influence campaign on Facebook and elsewhere. Well, this was, of course, completely ridiculous, and as evidence of how ridiculous the claims are, Trump's actual administration was just as foolishly tough on Russia as all of his predecessors. In 2017, Vice President Mike Pence reiterated the 2008 Bucharest Declaration, saying, President Trump and the United States stand firmly behind the 2008 NATO Bucharest Statement, which made it clear that Georgia will someday become a member. The Biden administration maintained that same fiction, and now, well, here we are. A clear declaration that Ukraine would not be joining NATO might have deprived Putin of the intellectual ammo he required to move forward with this invasion. Or not. We don't know for sure, but it was incumbent on the U.S. to try. NATO is a means to an end, a more safe and secure Europe, not an end unto itself. If its expansion is creating the very conditions its existence is supposed to prevent, well, it's not working. Yet every single U.S. president since the end of the Cold War has misunderstood this. And now, here we are. Hopefully not about to have a nuclear confrontation with a superpower. And again, this is Putin's fault. This is an unjustified expansion into Ukraine on his part that is inexcusable. It's wrong. The whole world knows it's wrong. It's just his fault. He didn't have to do this. He is doing this and people are dying. But all that said, we can look at what our policy to contain Russia is and we can criticize it. And bipartisan, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, going back to the fall of the Cold War, the approach they took with NATO was wrong. It didn't work.
I think that's extremely well said. And I think that we're not learning the lesson of the last 30 years now. I worry that after 30 years of confrontation, which has now gotten us to this brink, the EU and the United States think that more confrontation is what's needed at this moment, especially because egos are now involved. You know, once the bullets are flying, everybody's plans are out the window. And nobody yet has an answer to the question of, and then what? And so the EU wants to shut off Russia's central bank, wants to throw Russia off of SWIFT, wants to drive them completely into the ground. And then what? And it goes back to when the Soviet Union collapsed. You can read interviews with Gorbachev at the time saying that one of the reasons that he and other elites kind of allowed it to collapse was they felt like there was a better day on the other side, and that there would be a Marshall Plan coming from the West for the Soviet Union. And what he didn't realize is that the purpose of the Marshall Plan was to counter the Soviet Union. So no, the Marshall Plan is not for you. The Marshall Plan is against you. So if you're gone, we're just going to pick your carcass. And what the West did to Russia in the 1990s, in the collapse of it's the only industrialized country that's ever seen a precipitous decline in life expectancy over a sustained period of time. Add on top of that, the international humiliation of going from a superpower to that, and then as you rightly pointed out, NATO, which no longer has a reason to exist because its reason for existing is now gone, just begins expanding onto its border. Like you said, the person who's responsible for this war is the person who waged this war and is continuing to wage this war. But it is incumbent on us to look at the decisions over the last 30 years that we made and ask, did they bring us closer to peace or did they bring us closer to war? Was confrontation the move or was cooperation a better approach?
I think it points to how the middle ground was especially not useful. Like if you're if you're going to admit them and then defend them, then pledge yourself to defend them.
Do your world war if you really are going to go that way.
Well, we'd like to admit you. We're thinking about doing it. We're definitely going to do it. In fact, we're going to do it.
And we're going to give you lots of weapons and missiles that are going to really scare them. But if they come in and bomb your missiles, we're not going to do anything about it.
It gives Putin time to be madder and madder about this and to plan to do something about it. So that was a really dumb strategy that they pursued across different administrations for the last 30 years.
Yeah, and if you said anything different, you were kind of excluded from polite conversation in the foreign policy.
Doesn't make any sense. Look, I don't know that I think the point of punishing Russia right now in this moment is to maximize the hurt they're feeling, to make them give this up, to make them say this is not worth it, and then we can get rid of that harm.
Right, so that nobody feels like this is a thing that you're at all incentivized to do in the 21st century, right?
Yeah,
But then what?
Yeah, nobody wants a war to get, but nobody chose this war except Russia. So this is not analogous to a lot of our recent conflicts, where unfortunately the U.S. was the one driving the conflict, and I would say don't do it. This is on Russia to not do this. Everyone else is trying to figure out, well, what is the best way to stop this from happening?
Now, do you think that the West ought to give Putin a face-saving way out of this?
Yes. No, absolutely they should, because the point is to not have this conflict. Right. But as long as the conflict as long as he's pressing forward with this, I don't know, make them hurt. I don't believe in sanctions to create regime change long term, any of that. But the more that it seems like, as best we can tell, Putin didn't quite. This is not going as well as they expected. And if you can, in the just immediate short term, if we can ramp up the pain they're feeling, then maybe they give this up. Maybe not, but I think we have to try, because we're not going to do. We can't just let them take Ukraine, and we also can't have an actual World War III over this.
Right, and I think you're right. We've got to try to find some type of face-saving off-ramp.
Sure, absolutely.
Because this is a nuclear power that you're run by a madman right now. Like you gotta you don't want to corner that.
Yeah, this is crazy, and it's very quickly uniting a lot of the world against him, which is again certainly justified given the horror that he has unleashed.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you. Well, I'm looking forward to your radar coming up next.